The polished marble of the courthouse corridor reflected Chloe's triumphant smile, making two of her. She paced back and forth, her sharp heels clicking a percussive rhythm of victory against the floor. One hand, adorned with a diamond ring that Ethan had bought her in leaner, happier times, held her phone to her ear. Her voice, loud and ringing with undisguised glee, echoed in the cavernous space. "Marcus, you are not going to believe this," she sang into the phone. "3 million. The judge signed off. Not a penny less. Can you believe how easy it was?" He just folded. A few yards away, leaning against a cool wall, Ethan Vance stood in perfect stillness. He watched her, his face a neutral mask that betrayed none of the churning emotions within. He wore a simple, dark gray suit, well-made but unremarkable, the kind of suit a man buys for its utility, not its statement. It was a stark contrast to Chloe's couture dress, a slash of defiant crimson that screamed wealth and power. She looked like a victor. He looked like what he was supposed to be, the vanquished. He just stood there. "Marcus," she continued, her laughter sharp and cruel, with that stupid, wounded puppy look on his face. "Oh God, I can't wait to be free of that pathetic energy. The house is mine. The settlement is mine. My life is finally mine." She cast a dismissive glance over her shoulder at Ethan, a final, theatrical twist of a knife. To her, he was no longer a person but a footnote in the story of her glorious ascent. Ethan met her gaze. He didn't flinch. He didn't scowl. His expression was one of profound, almost weary, finality. It was the look of an architect inspecting a building just before its scheduled demolition, noting the cracks and flaws not with anger, but with a quiet acknowledgement of the inevitable. He had built their life together on what he thought was solid ground, only to discover, over a decade, that he was the sole occupant of the structure. She had been living elsewhere for years. Chloe turned her back on him again, her conversation with her lover dropping to a more intimate, conspiratorial tone. "Tonight, we celebrate. Book the penthouse suite at the Elysian. Order the champagne. No, the really good stuff. We have 3 million reasons to." Ethan's focus drifted to the worn leather satchel resting on the floor beside him. Its surface was scarred with the marks of a dozen countries, of late nights on construction sites, and early mornings in drafting rooms. To Chloe, it was an object of ridicule, the sad little bag of a sad little man. To Ethan, it was a vault. It held the truth. As Chloe laughed one last time, a throaty sound of pure, unadulterated avarice, her phone emitted a different tone. A call waiting. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing in annoyance. "Ugh, hold on, Marcus. Some block number is bothering me." She sighed, a dramatic exhalation of impatience, and switched lines. "Hello. This had better be important." Ethan watched, his posture unchanging. He saw the exact moment the universe shifted under her feet. The triumphant smile didn't just fade. It was wiped away, leaving behind a slack-jawed vacancy. The vibrant color drained from her cheeks, replaced by a sickly, waxy pallor. Her knuckles, clutching the phone, turned white. "Who is this?" she stammered, her voice suddenly small, thin. There was a pause as she listened, her eyes wide and unblinking. The hand, not holding the phone, rose to her throat. The IRS," she whispered, the words barely audible in the suddenly silent corridor. "What do you mean, a federal investigation? Now? But that's impossible." Her eyes darted around frantically, searching for an explanation, for an escape. They landed on Ethan. He was still watching her, his expression no longer neutral. It was now one of quiet, devastating pity. In that moment, she knew. She didn't know how, but she knew. This was his doing. The man she had just crushed, the man she had mocked and dismissed, had somehow brought the heavens crashing down upon her head. Have you ever watched a tower built on sand begin to crumble? It starts not with a roar, but with a whisper. A single grain of sand shifts, then another, and soon the entire foundation, once thought so firm, reveals itself to be an illusion. Let us know in the comments where you're watching this story of collapse and consequence from. Stick with us to see how the foundations of this particular lie were laid, and how they were always, always destined to fall. Because to understand that chilling phone call in the marble hall, we have to go back 6 months to a night of quiet humiliation and a promise made in silence. The clinking of wine glasses and the low hum of self-important conversation filled the open-plan living space of their meticulously designed home. The house itself was a testament to Ethan's understated genius, a study in clean lines, natural light, and seamless integration with the surrounding landscape. It was a space that breathed. His friends, fellow architects and academics, understood it. Chloe's friends, bankers, and socialites saw only a house that wasn't ostentatious enough. Chloe was in her element, a queen holding court. She moved through the clusters of guests, her laughter a little too loud, her smile a little too bright. Ethan was a satellite in her orbit, occasionally pulled in to be displayed before being allowed to drift away again. "And this is my brilliant husband, Ethan," she would say, her hand briefly touching his arm. "He draws buildings." The phrase was a masterpiece of condescension, reducing his complex, artful profession to a child's pastime. The guests would offer him polite, fleeting smiles before turning their attention back to more important matters, like interest rates and the summer season in the Hamptons. Ethan endured it, as he always did, with a quiet grace that was perpetually mistaken for weakness. He would answer their perfunctory questions with simple, direct answers, his lack of boastfulness seen not as humility, but as a lack of anything to boast about. The evening's main event of humiliation was orchestrated by Richard, the husband of Chloe's best friend, a hedge fund manager with the predatory grin of a shark that had just cornered the market on seals. He cornered Ethan by the expansive window overlooking the canyon. "So, Ethan," Richard began, swirling a bold Cabernet in his glass. "Chloe tells me you're an architect. Tough game, that. I mean, unless you're one of the greats, a real starchitect, you're basically just designing extensions for dentists, right?" He chuckled, inviting the others in his small circle to join in. Ethan looked out the window for a moment at the way the twilight settled into the canyon, turning the greens to deep indigo. "There's honor in all well-crafted work," he said, his voice even. "Honor doesn't pay for a place like this," Richard pressed, gesturing around the room with his glass. "Chloe has expensive taste. You keeping up?" Before Ethan could respond, Chloe swept in, placing a hand on Richard's arm. "Oh, Richard, don't tease him," she laughed, but her eyes were cold as they flickered toward Ethan. "My Ethan is perfectly happy in his little niche. He's not one for the limelight. Ambition gives him a rash." The group laughed, and Ethan felt the familiar, hot sting of shame. It wasn't for himself, but for her, for the casual cruelty she wielded like a fashion accessory. He simply nodded, a small, tight movement of his head, and excused himself. "I should see if our guests need anything." He retreated to the kitchen, the laughter following him down the hall. He stood by the counter, gripping its cold stone edge, and took a slow, deep breath. He could hear Chloe, her voice carrying clearly. I know. He's just so serious. God forbid he network a little. Marcus says a man who doesn't network is a man who's going nowhere." Marcus. The name hung in the air. Marcus Thorne, the flashy real estate developer whose face was plastered on billboards all over the city. A man who built glass boxes that were monuments to ego, not to human experience. A man Chloe spoke of with a reverence she had never once afforded her own husband. Later that night, after the last guest had departed, the performance ended and the raw truth emerged. "You were an embarrassment tonight, Ethan," Chloe said, her voice stripped of its party charm. She was in their bedroom, pulling off her expensive jewelry and dropping it carelessly onto the dresser. "I don't understand," he said, though he understood perfectly. "You just sat there. When Richard was talking to you, you just took it. You look like a child at the adults' table. You have no ambition, no drive. Do you have any idea how that makes me look?" "I don't measure my worth by how I look to Richard," he said quietly. "Well, you should," she snapped, whirling to face him. "Because his opinion matters in the world I want to live in. A world you seem to have no interest in joining. Look at Marcus Thorne. He's building half the city. He's a force. People respect him. And you're just sketching. You spend your days sketching in that little book of yours like a schoolboy. He said nothing. His gaze fell upon his leather satchel, which he had placed on a chair in the corner of the room. Inside it, nestled among his notebooks and pens, was an encrypted hard drive. On that drive were the final schematics and ownership documents for the Helios Museum of Art, a project that had just been awarded the Pritzker Prize, architecture's highest honor. The award had been accepted by the front company he had established years ago to shield himself from the very world Chloe so desperately craved. He had won a life of quiet work, not a celebrity. He had thought she understood that, had thought she shared that value. He saw now that she had only been biding her time. He looked from the satchel back to his wife. He thought of the principles of structural engineering. A foundation could only bear so much weight. A beam could only withstand so much stress before it began to fracture. He felt the first hairline crack appear in the structure of their marriage. It was invisible to her, but to his trained eye, it was a catastrophic failure in the making. The declaration came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning. It was delivered with the same emotional detachment as a weather report. "I want a divorce, Ethan." Chloe was standing in the kitchen, already dressed for the day, a cup of coffee in her hand. She hadn't been to their bed the previous night, a common enough occurrence that he had stopped questioning it. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between them. It felt like a scene from a play, unnaturally lit and staged. "I see," he said. He had been expecting it, in a way one expects a storm after seeing the clouds gather. Still, the reality of it landed with a heavy, physical thud in his chest. "Is there someone else?" She gave a small, dismissive shrug. "That's not the point. The point is, this isn't working. It hasn't been working for years. I've wasted my best years waiting for you to become something more. I can't wait any longer." Her tone was final. This wasn't the opening of a dialogue. It was the epilogue. He learned just how final it was 2 days later. She had already retained a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Rexford Rex Thorne, a man whose reputation preceded him. He was known as the Shark, a litigator who specialized in high-asset divorces and was famous for leaving the opposing party with little more than their dignity, and sometimes not even that. The fact that he shared a surname with her new idol, Marcus Thorne, was an irony not lost on Ethan. They were cousins, a fact Chloe had conveniently failed to mention. The first meeting was a masterclass in intimidation. It took place in Rexford's office, a sterile environment of chrome, glass, and black leather that seemed designed to make one feel small and insignificant. Chloe and Rexford sat on one side of a vast mahogany desk, a united front of predatory confidence. Ethan sat on the other, alone. He had agreed to come without his own counsel, a gesture of goodwill he had extended in a foolish, fading hope that this could be handled with some measure of civility. "Mr. Vance," Rexford began, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. "My client, Chloe, has instructed me to resolve this matter as efficiently as possible. To that end, we have prepared a preliminary settlement offer." He slid a sheaf of papers across the desk. Ethan didn't touch it. "We've conducted a preliminary assessment of your shared assets," Rexford continued, steepling his fingers. "The house, of course, will go to Chloe. It is her primary residence and emotional anchor." He said the words emotional anchor with a smirk that told Ethan he found the concept ridiculous. "Her car as well. We have appraised your consultancy business, Vance Consultants, and its projected earnings. Based on that, and in consideration of the decade of her life Chloe has dedicated to supporting your career." He let the sentence hang in the air, the implication being that her support was a quantifiable and expensive commodity. "We are proposing a one-time payment to you of $50,000, in exchange for which you will waive all future claims to any and all assets, current and future. $50,000 for a decade of his life, for the home he had designed and built, for a future he had imagined." It wasn't an offer, it was an insult, a declaration of his worthlessness in her eyes. Chloe finally spoke, her voice laced with a rehearsed, patronizing sympathy. "Ethan, this is for the best. You know it is. You can't give me the life I deserve. You're a good man, in your own way, but you're limited. I need more. I'm taking what I'm owed for the years I invested in you." Ethan looked at her. He saw not the woman he had married, but a stranger. A stranger wearing her face, speaking with her voice, but animated by a cold, rapacious spirit he had never truly allowed himself to see. He finally broke his silence. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the smug atmosphere of the room. "Is that what you feel you're owed, Chloe?" The question was simple, devoid of anger or accusation, but it landed with surprising weight. It made her uncomfortable. She shifted in her chair, her eyes flicking to Rexford for support. "It's what the law will give me," she retorted, her confidence returning. "It's what I'll get." Ethan stood up. He hadn't touched the papers. "I've heard your offer," he said. "I'll consider it." He turned and walked out of the office. As the heavy doors swung shut behind him, he heard the eruption of their laughter. "That was even easier than I thought it would be," Rexford crowed. "He has no fight in him at all." "I told you," came Chloe's triumphant reply. "He's a simple man." Ethan walked down the street, not seeing the bustling city around him. He felt a profound coldness seep into his bones. It wasn't sadness. It was something harder, clearer. It was resolve. He took out his phone and made a call. "Anya," he said, "it's Ethan Vance." An hour later, he was not in a lawyer's office, but in a discreet, unmarked building in a quieter part of the city. The office he entered was the antithesis of Rexford's. Warm wood, soft lighting, walls lined with books. It was the headquarters of a private wealth management firm so exclusive that it didn't even have a name on the door. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor greeted him. Her name was Anya Sharma. She had managed the vast, hidden architecture of his finances for the last 10 years. She was the only other person in the world who knew the full extent of his success. He sat down opposite her, placing his worn leather satchel on the table between them. "She's made her move," he said, his voice flat. "Anya nodded slowly." And Ethan looked at her, and for the first time that day, a flicker of something other than weary control crossed his face. It was the look of a grandmaster who has just seen his opponent fall into a carefully laid trap. "It's time," he said. "Begin the preparations." Phase 1 The discovery process was, for Rexford Thorne, an exercise in mounting frustration. He had expected to find hidden accounts, undeclared income, the usual small-time deceptions of a man trying to shield a modest nest egg. Instead, he found a financial life of almost monastic simplicity. Ethan's declared income came from a single source, a regular salary from Vance Consultants, a firm with only one employee, Ethan himself. The salary was respectable but far from extravagant, barely enough to justify the mortgage on their house, let alone Chloe's lavish spending habits. There was a standard 401k, a checking account with a modest balance, and a savings account that was surprisingly lean. It was all clean, transparent, and maddeningly small. "He's hiding something," Rexford insisted to Chloe during one of their strategy sessions. He paced his office, chewing on the end of an expensive pen. "It has to be here somewhere. Cash. An undeclared partnership. Something. Nobody is this clean." Chloe, lounging on a leather sofa, waved a dismissive hand. "Rex, I've been telling you for months. There's nothing there. This is who he is. He's a simple man. His biggest ambition is to find the perfect drafting pencil. The money came from my family trust, my inheritance. His income just paid the bills. Barely." Her conviction, born of a decade of looking down on him, was contagious. Rexford began to entertain the possibility that she was right. Perhaps Ethan Vance really was just a failure, a man who had lucked into a beautiful wife and a nice house and had done nothing to earn either. The thought pleased him. It made the kill cleaner, less complicated. Still, his predatory instincts told him to push one last time. The deposition was held in a soulless conference room. Ethan sat at one end of a long table, his ever-present leather satchel on the chair beside him. He was the picture of calm. On the other side, Chloe and Rexford were a study in bored arrogance. A court stenographer sat at the head of the table, her fingers poised over her machine. Rexford began his interrogation, his questions designed to be 1,000 tiny cuts. He circled Ethan's professional life, sniffing for any scent of deception. "Mr. Vance," he began, leaning forward, "your records show a business trip to Dubai in May of last year. Your consultancy, as we have established, has no clients in the United Arab Emirates. Was this a personal trip disguised as a business expense?" Ethan met his gaze without blinking. "I was attending an architectural symposium." Rexford let out a short, derisive laugh. "A symposium? How academic. And who paid for this educational jaunt, Mr. Vance?" "The ticket was first class. The hotel was the Burj Al Arab. That's a significant expense for a man of your declared means." "The symposium organizers covered my expenses," Ethan replied, his voice a low, steady monotone. "How generous of them," Rexford sneered. "Just to have you as an attendee? Or were you perhaps meeting with potential clients off the books? Wealthy sheiks who pay in cash, perhaps?" "I was an attendee," Ethan repeated, offering no further detail. The dramatic irony was a tangible presence in the room, felt only by Ethan and, by extension, the audience to his silent drama. The stenographer's fingers flew, capturing the cruel remark for the official record. Rexford smirked. Chloe's comment had done more damage than his questions ever could, painting Ethan as a pathetic dreamer in the cold, hard language of a legal transcript. Ethan's expression didn't change, but his eyes, for a fraction of a second, hardened to chips of flint. He was a collector of moments, an archivist of slights. He mentally filed this one away with all the others. His hand moved, almost unconsciously, to rest on the worn leather of his satchel. He felt the solid shape of the encrypted drive within. It was an anchor in the storm of their derision, a silent promise that a reckoning was not just possible, but meticulously planned. He was building a case, and like all his structures, it was being assembled with precision, patience, and an unshakable design. Chloe and Rexford thought they were dismantling his life, but they were only handing him the blueprints for their own destruction. While Chloe and Rexford celebrated their perceived victories, Ethan engaged in a different kind of preparation. His evenings were not spent in despair, but in quiet, methodical work. In the small, clean apartment he had rented, he transformed his dining table into a war room. But the weapons were not legal briefs or financial loopholes. They were memories. He began compiling his list of grievances. It was not an act of petty score settling, but of architectural precision. He was laying the foundation for the moral case he intended to build. He went through years of emails, printing out the ones where Chloe had dismissed his ideas or belittled his work to her friends. He transcribed text messages, her casual cruelties now stark and damning in black and white on the page. He even found a recording on his phone from a year prior, a pocket dial from Chloe, where he could hear her laughing with Marcus, describing her husband as a sweet, simple man-child I have to manage. Each piece of evidence was a brick. He laid them out, one by one, creating a wall of disrespect so high, so solid, that even Chloe, in her willful blindness, would not be able to ignore it. This was not for the court of law, but for the court of truth. His days were spent with Anya Sharma. Her office became his sanctuary. Anya was more than a wealth manager. She was a grandmaster of financial strategy, with a forensic accountant's eye for detail and a chess player's ability to see 10 moves ahead. Together, they were not preparing a defense. They were preparing a revelation. The shell corporations Marcus Thorne set up for Chloe are sloppy, Anya noted one afternoon, pointing to a complex flowchart on her monitor. He's arrogant. He thinks he's clever, moving anticipated income into these entities to minimize the tax burden. He's counting on the settlement being a private transaction. He doesn't know it's about to become a federal case. Ethan finished for her. Anya looked at him, her expression serious. "Are you absolutely certain you want to go through with this, Ethan? The whistleblower report is a nuclear option. It will destroy her, and it will bring a level of scrutiny to your own affairs that you've spent a decade avoiding." She gestured to another set of files on her desk, a thick stack of papers detailing his vast international portfolio. The holding companies, the silent partnerships, The royalty streams from his designs, all meticulously structured to be legal, ethical, but intensely private. You could just give her the 3 million, Anya continued softly. You could give her 10. You wouldn't even feel it. You could sign the papers, walk away, and maintain your anonymity. Why are you choosing this path? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. He looked at his hands, the hands of a man who builds things. When I was starting out, my mentor told me something I never forgot. He said, his voice low and reflective. He said, an architect's first responsibility is to the truth of his materials. You can't make wood behave like steel. You can't build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand for 10 years. I have tried to make my marriage something it wasn't. I tried to believe it was built on a foundation of love and respect. It wasn't. It was built on her ambition and my silence. He finally looked up, and his eyes were clear with purpose. This isn't about the money, Anya. It never was. It's about the truth. A structure built on a lie cannot stand. She has to see the real foundation. She has to see what the materials she was working with truly were. She has to understand what she demolished. Not for my sake, for hers. The scene shifted, a perfect parallel of their two diverging realities. In a gleaming, glass-walled sales office overlooking the city, Chloe and Marcus were raising champagne flutes. They were standing in a scale model of the penthouse apartment they were about to purchase. To our new life, Marcus toasted, his arm possessively around Chloe's waist. And to your brilliant negotiating. It wasn't that hard, Chloe said with a smug smile, taking a sip of champagne. He was always weak. I just finally had the courage to push him over. As soon as the settlement comes through, this is all ours. She gestured around at the model, her eyes shining with avarice. Miles away, in his quiet, sparsely furnished apartment, Ethan was also working on a model. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a preliminary design for a new National Museum of Natural History, a flowing, organic structure that seemed to grow out of the earth itself. He was sketching, just as Chloe had accused him of, but he wasn't sketching a garage. He was shaping the future skyline of a city on the other side of the world. The contrast was a silent, damning judgment. She was celebrating the acquisition of a gaudy cage, while he was quietly designing a cathedral to the natural world. She thought she was winning, but she had already lost the one thing of value she ever possessed. She just didn't know it yet. The day before the final hearing was thick with a strange, heavy stillness. It was the quiet before the storm, the deceptive calm before a controlled demolition. Chloe spent the afternoon having lunch with her mother, Eleanor, at a chic bistro. Eleanor, a woman who had enabled her daughter's every whim, for once looked troubled. She picked at her salade niçoise, her brow furrowed. "Chloe, are you absolutely certain about this?" Eleanor asked, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "The way you're handling this, it feels so aggressive. Ethan has always been a steady, kind man." Chloe rolled her eyes, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "Steady and boring, mother. Kind and unambitious. Don't go soft on me now. I need more than steady, I deserve more." He held me back for a decade with his small-mindedness. Tomorrow, I get my life back, and I get my payday. It's a win-win. But to take the house, and so much money, it seems cruel, Eleanor pressed gently. "It's not cruel, it's business," Chloe snapped, her patience gone. "He's the one who didn't want to play the game. He loses. I win. That's how it works. Now, can we please talk about something more pleasant? I saw the most divine pair of shoes at Bellamy's yesterday." Eleanor fell silent, her brief rebellion quelled. She was a silent enabler, a buttress for Chloe's flawed character, and she had just failed her final structural test. Ethan spent the evening alone. His apartment was quiet, the only sound the soft scratch of his pen on paper as he made final notes. He was not nervous. A profound sense of calm had settled over him. Everything that could be done had been done. The plans were drawn, the materials were in place, the crew was ready. All that remained was to execute the design. He methodically laid out his clothes for the next day. The simple gray suit, a crisp white shirt, a conservative silk tie. It was a uniform of quiet competence, designed to be overlooked. He placed his worn leather satchel by the door, its presence both a comfort and a promise. Later, as he stood looking out his window at the city lights, he picked up a small, framed photograph from his desk. It was of him and Chloe, taken on their honeymoon. They were young, smiling, their faces bright with a future that had seemed limitless. A pang of genuine sorrow went through him, not for the woman she had become, but for the woman he thought she was, the woman in the photograph who had been lost somewhere along the way. The narrator's voice seems to permeate the silence of the room, a somber reflection on the nature of love and its decay. Betrayal is rarely a sudden, violent act. More often, it is a slow erosion, a quiet withholding of respect, a casual dismissal, 1,000 tiny, unspoken choices that, over time, wear away the very bedrock of a relationship until nothing is left but a hollow shell, waiting for the slightest pressure to collapse into dust. Ethan had spent years trying to shore up the crumbling walls, patching the cracks, pretending the foundation was still sound. Tomorrow, he would finally admit the structure was condemned. He would pull the lever and walk away from the wreckage, not with joy, but with the grim satisfaction of a necessary job well done. The quiet of his apartment was not the silence of defeat, but the focused silence of a man about to change the world. At least his world and Chloe's. The courtroom was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. It was a room designed for conclusions, not conversations. Chloe and Rexford Thorne sat at the plaintiff's table, a pair of sleek predators radiating an almost unbearable smugness. Chloe wore a cream-colored suit, an ironic choice of bridal white for the day she would officially bury her marriage. Rexford kept checking his gold watch, eager to get to his celebratory lunch. On the other side, at the defendant's table, sat Ethan, but he was not alone. Beside him was a woman no one in the room recognized. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a posture of unshakable composure. This was Eleanor Albright, a legend in the world of forensic litigation, a lawyer so skilled and so discreet that most of her victories were never reported in the press. In the gallery, sitting quietly in the second row, was Anya Sharma. She gave Ethan a small, reassuring nod. The judge, a weary man named Harrison, peered down over his spectacles. He had seen 100 divorces like this, messy and acrimonious. He just wanted it to be over. "We are here," Judge Harrison announced, his voice flat, "to finalize the settlement agreement in the matter of Davis versus Vance. I have the signed agreement here. A payment of $3 million from Mr. Vance to Ms. Davis, the transfer of the primary residence, and the waiving of all future claims. Is that correct?" Rexford stood, beaming. "It is, Your Honor. We are ready to proceed." The judge turned his tired eyes to Ethan. "Mr. Vance, do you have any final statements before I sign this order?" Rexford's smirk widened. He expected a final, pathetic plea for mercy, a last gasp from a defeated man. It would be the perfect end to his triumph. Ethan stood slowly. His movements were deliberate, calm. When he spoke, his voice was not the broken whisper they expected, but a clear, steady tone that carried to every corner of the room. "Yes, Your Honor, I do," he said. "Before I agreed to this settlement, I have a few things I would like to place on the record. For the sake of clarity." Rexford immediately shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. The agreement is signed. My client has been through enough." The judge looked at Ethan, a flicker of interest in his eyes. There was something in Ethan's demeanor, a quiet authority, a lack of fear, that was unusual. "Overruled," the judge said, waving Rexford back into his seat. "The court will allow it. Proceed, Mr. Vance." Ethan nodded his thanks. He did not look at his notes. He didn't need them. He had lived them. "This settlement," he began, "is predicated on a certain narrative. A narrative in which I am a man of limited means and even more limited ambition. A narrative in which my wife of 10 years, Ms. Davis, has been held back, her potential stifled by my failures." He paused, his eyes finding Chloe's. "On the evening of October 12th, at a dinner party in our home, Ms. Davis described my life's work as sketching on November 3rd, during a deposition, she referred to me as a man-child and speculated that my professional travel was merely an excuse to stare at big buildings for the past 6 months. She and her counsel have operated under the assumption that my entire net worth was contained within the 4 walls of the house I designed. He was reciting his list of grievances, not with anger, but with the dispassionate precision of a historian. Chloe's face began to flush with color. This was not how the script was supposed to go. The settlement awards Ms. Davis $3 million. Ethan continued, his voice unwavering. A figure based on a speculative and, I would argue, inflated valuation of my future earning potential. I want the record to show that I agree to this amount. I accept the figure of $3 million. A wave of relief washed over Chloe's face. Rexford shot her a triumphant look. It was a strange final speech, but the outcome was the same. They had won. However, Ethan added, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine, the assessment upon which this figure is based is fundamentally flawed. Not, as you might think, in my wife's favor, but in mine. He reached down and for the first time opened his worn leather satchel. The sound of the brass clasp clicking open was unnaturally loud in the silent room. He withdrew a single elegantly bound document. Its cover is simple, deep blue. Your Honor, he said, for the past 8 years, for reasons of personal and professional privacy, I have conducted my work through a series of corporate veils and under a professional pseudonym. The entity you have been investigating, Vance Consultants, is little more than a payroll service. He placed the blue document on the table. In that moment, Eleanor Albright stood. Your Honor, she said, her voice crisp and commanding. We are now submitting a full, audited, and verified schedule of my client's assets for the court's record. We believe you will find it illuminating. She picked up the document and handed it to the bailiff, who in turn passed it up to the judge. Rexford scoffed, though a worm of anxiety had begun to squirm in his gut. Your Honor, this is a desperate, last-minute tactic. We won't allow. Counselor, the judge's voice was ice. He had opened the document. His eyes, moments ago so weary, were now wide with astonishment. He looked up from the pages, over the top of his glasses, first at Ethan, then at Rexford, then at a suddenly terrified-looking Chloe. I would strongly advise you to be silent. The room was tomb quiet. The only sound was the faint rustle of paper as the judge turned a page. He looked at Ethan again, this time with a dawning profound respect. Ethan's voice, when he spoke again, was still quiet, but it seemed to hold the acoustic properties of the room, to fill every inch of the space. It was the quiet bomb he had spent months constructing. The number you arrived at, Rexford, Ethan said, using the lawyer's first name for the first time, a subtle assertion of dominance. $3 million, a number you fought for so valiantly. It represents, by our calculations, approximately 0.5% of the marital assets you failed to uncover during your exhaustive discovery. He let that sink in. The air crackled. Assets which, according to the laws of this state, he continued, I was fully prepared to split 50-50 had I been treated with a single ounce of human decency or respect during this process. He finally turned his full attention to his wife. It was time for the moral mirror. Chloe, he said, and her name was a shard of ice. You told me you wanted a man who builds things. You lamented that I only sketched. You admired men like Marcus Thorne. He took a breath. The Ethelred Tower in London. The Helios Museum in Singapore that just won the Pritzker Prize. The Sentosa Gateway Resort. The new National Archive in Canberra. He listed them like a poet reciting his works. Those are my sketches. My designs. My company's built them. My name isn't on the billboards, but it's on the ownership deeds. Chloe's face had crumpled. The mask of arrogance was gone, replaced by a grotesque tableau of disbelief, horror, and a dawning, sickening comprehension. Rexford looked as if he had been physically struck, his mouth hanging open, his face pale and clammy. The total value of those assets, my assets, the marital assets, Ethan stated, his voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a great, abyssal sadness, is just north of $600 million. The silence in the courtroom was no longer just quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking the very air from Chloe's lungs. She made a small, choking sound. But Ethan wasn't finished. The demolition had one final, crucial stage. "But this settlement, this day, is not about the money I have," he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming more intense. "It's about the money that you, Chloe, and your partner, Marcus Thorne, have already tried to hide. It's about taxes." Eleanor Albright rose once more, a grim reaper in a tailored suit. "Your Honor," she announced, her voice ringing with cold, legal fury. "My client was not the only one keeping secrets. In anticipation of this settlement, Ms. Davis and her financial advisor, Mr. Marcus Thorne, engaged in a pattern of behavior that can only be described as a conspiracy to commit tax fraud." The word fraud exploded in the silent room. Chloe flinched as if she'd been slapped. Ms. Albright laid it all out with chilling precision. She explained how Chloe and Marcus, so certain of their $3 million prize, had established a series of shell corporations. They had pre-signed contracts and funneled money into them, creating a complex web designed to hide the settlement income from the government. That was the first crime. The second was worse. For years, they had been systematically undervaluing shared marital assets on their joint tax returns to pay less tax. Yet, for the purpose of the divorce, Rexford had submitted documents wildly inflating the value of those same assets to justify the settlement. It was a blatant, provable contradiction. It was fraud, pure and simple. "My client discovered these discrepancies months ago," Ms. Albright stated, her gaze fixed on the judge. "He was prepared to overlook them. He was prepared to pay the back taxes and penalties himself, quietly, to protect Ms. Davis from the consequences of her own greed." Ethan picked up the narrative, his eyes locked on Chloe's. "I was going to let you have the house, the money, the life you thought you wanted. I was going to let you believe you had one. All I asked for in return was a shred of dignity." He let the words hang in the air. But the behavior in this courtroom, the insults, the public humiliation, they have consequences. You and Rexford and Marcus, you didn't just want to win. You wanted to destroy me. You wanted to humiliate me. You mistook my patience for weakness. You mistook my silence for stupidity. Ms. Albright delivered the final, devastating blow. "Your Honor, given the egregious and criminal nature of the plaintiff's conduct, we could no longer remain silent. 3 months ago, on behalf of my client, we submitted a comprehensive whistleblower report to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service and the Department of Justice. My client, Mr. Vance, has been their primary confidential informant. The investigation has been active and ongoing." The judge stared, speechless for a moment, at the scale of the revelation. Then, a cold fury settled on his features. He looked at Chloe and Rexford with a level of contempt that seemed to physically scorch them. "This court," he thundered, his voice shaking with rage, "will not be made a party to fraud." He slammed his gavel down. "The settlement agreement is hereby voided on the grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation and criminal misconduct by the plaintiff. I am referring you, Mr. Thorne, to the State Bar for immediate disciplinary proceedings with a recommendation for disbarment. And Ms. Davis, your greed has just cost you everything." He granted the divorce instantly, but reverted the settlement to the bare state minimum, a sum so pitiful it was a final insult. Chloe would get almost nothing. The scene dissolved and reformed in the polished marble corridor moments later. We are back where we began. Chloe stood, frozen, a statue of ruin. Her victory, her celebration, her phone call to Marcus, it had all been a fantasy. The life she had grasped for had turned to smoke in her hands. Her phone, which had fallen from her nerveless fingers, buzzed again on the floor. It was Marcus, but it wasn't a call. It was a text. "They're freezing my accounts. The feds are here. It was you." And then the second call, the one from the block number, the one she answered in a daze. The agent from the IRS, his voice calm and implacable, informing her that a warrant had been issued, that her assets were frozen, and that she was the subject of a major federal investigation. She looked up, her eyes wild with panic, and saw him. "Ethan, He was walking down the long corridor toward the exit, his simple gray suit seeming to absorb the light. His worn leather satchel was in his hand. He did not look back. "Ethan!" she cried, her voice a raw, desperate croak. "Ethan, wait!" But he kept walking. He didn't turn. He didn't slow down. He simply disappeared through the heavy doors at the end of the hall, stepping out into the bright, sunlit world, leaving her alone in the cold, echoing shadows of the ruin she had built for herself. The unexpected ally wasn't a person who had shown up to save him. It was the entire, crushing weight of the United States government, a force he had summoned not with a shout, but with a quiet, principled whisper. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing unraveling for Chloe. Her world, once so vibrant and full of promise, shrank and turned gray. The federal investigation was swift and brutal. Marcus, in a desperate bid to save himself, turned on her completely, providing prosecutors with emails and recordings that painted her as the mastermind of the entire fraudulent scheme. Her friends, the ones who had toasted her success, now crossed the street to avoid her. Their phones went straight to voicemail. The house, her emotional anchor, was seized as a proceed of crime. The designer clothes, the expensive car, the jewelry, all were liquidated by federal marshals to pay the colossal fines and penalties. She was forced to hire a cut-rate public defender, the only lawyer she could afford. Rexford Thorne, facing disbarment and his own legal troubles, refused to even take her calls. Her parents, shamed and horrified, offered her a place to stay, but their home felt like a prison of silent judgment. Eventually, she moved into a small, bleak apartment in a run-down part of the city. It was the kind of place she would have once driven by with a shudder of disgust. Now it was home. The irony was poetic and crushing. She had fought so hard to escape a life she perceived as simple, only to be condemned to a life of genuine poverty, stripped of all the superficial markers of status she held so dear. One evening, as she was watching the local news on a small, flickering television, a story came on. A major philanthropic foundation had announced a record-breaking anonymous donation to establish a new school of architecture and design, specifically for underprivileged students. The donation would fund the entire construction and provide scholarships in perpetuity. The amount was staggering, $50 million. Chloe watched, her face numb, as the reporter talked about the mysterious benefactor, a person who clearly believed in the power of building a better future. She knew, with a certainty that was like a stone in her gut, who the donor was. The final scene took place 6 months later. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across a bustling construction site. The steel skeleton of a magnificent building was rising against the twilight sky, the future home of the Vance School of Architecture and Design. Ethan stood on high vantage point, looking over the site. The wind ruffled his hair. He was no longer wearing a suit, but comfortable jeans and a work jacket. He looked at peace, his face etched with a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with creation. Anya Sharma came to stand beside him, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to him. "It's beautiful, Ethan," she said, looking at the rising structure. "It will be," he agreed. "The foundation is solid." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the workers below. She tried to call again. Anya said softly, "Chloe." Her lawyer did, too. He says she's prepared to issue a public apology. "She'll do anything," he says. "She's broken." Ethan took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving the building. "An apology without genuine change is just a negotiation," he said, his voice thoughtful. "She's not sorry for what she did. She's sorry she got caught. She's sorry for the consequences." He turned to look at Anya, a sad wisdom in his eyes. "In my work, when a building's core integrity is compromised, you can't just repaint the walls and fix the windows. The structure is condemned. You can't renovate it. The only thing to do is demolish it and build something new, something with a better foundation, built on better ground." He had demolished the condemned structure of his old life. Now he was building something new, something that would last, something that would give back. He had not sought revenge. He had sought a realignment with the truth. Justice had been the byproduct. He had maintained his moral high ground, refusing to become the cruel, vindictive person they had tried to make him. And in the end, he was free. He looked out at the city skyline, a skyline he had secretly shaped, and he felt not the pride of ownership, but the deep, quiet joy of a creator who sees his work making the world a little more beautiful. True worth is not in what we display, but in what we build. It's in the foundations of character, integrity, and the quiet respect we show to those around us. Chloe saw a simple man, and in her blindness to his true worth, she missed the master architect of a world she couldn't even begin to imagine. What do you think is the most important foundation for any relationship? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story of quiet strength and poetic justice inspiring, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of vindication and redemption.